Devanshi Pagaria from South City International School, Kolkata. So, as you talked about inflation, sir, I have a question that while in India, if we have like inflation, then many of the people are below the poverty line. So, when there's inflation, the government really needs to focus on the social and economic welfare of the people, and they need to spend a lot of money on it. Whereas if you see the developed nations, they don't have people mostly below the poverty line. So they put a curb on the spending of the government. So how do you think India would tackle this issue? Because they have a lot of spending when it comes to managing people who are below the poverty line during inflation.
Yeah, so I'm summing up a little bit of your question.
Yes.
What's your name?
Devanshi.
Devanshi. So tell me if I'm paraphrasing your question right, that given that in India there are lots of people below the poverty line, and that is indeed true, it's a shocking number still, and inflation, when it hits them, they have virtually nothing to be able to combat that. So what should the government do?
Yes, sir. Compared to other countries, they
Yeah.
have a huge amount of savings. So how, as it is inflation, we spend a lot. So what does the
should we
government
do? Yeah.
What
So-
should the government do in this position?
Moshumi was once my student, so I could insist that she gives the answer. I'm just joking. Whoever feels like, yeah. Maybe I'll also sit there so we can. That's fine. Oh, I can stay. Actually, I prefer. Moshmi, you want to anyone pull in? Nalini, whoever wants to jump in on what you do. Pull in, yeah, it's inequality related also. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that it's true. In the Indian context, the situation is particularly dire, no question about it. To begin with, our per capita income is very low. We are at about somewhere around 2,600 US dollars per person per annum. Which is in a listing of say 190 countries or so. Our number is somewhere around 130 to 135. We're as low as that, not in the top 100. So the average level is very low. And then because of the skewness, income inequality, the bottom sections are particularly vulnerable. And the bottom sections go below the poverty line. You are absolutely right about that. The government can do certain things, but one of the key things that the government needs to think of are two. Education, which Moshmi talked about earlier, and health. Now, it so happens that in the Indian context, in recent years, somehow there is reason to believe that the government has not done adequately in terms of education and health. Because if these two things are sort of adequately provided for, that gives a cushion to everyone, and in particular the bottom sections. For a variety of reasons, a lot of withdrawal of the government, both from the public education system as well as the health system. Of course, 5-star hospitals are coming up, etc., but they are completely unaffordable for the bottom sections of the population. So the government has to, bolster. These are two goods which are often called merit goods, education and health. These are goods which ought to be provided for by the government's budgetary process. Now, India spends on health something like just 1.3% of GDP on public expenditure on health. It is one of the lowest percentages in the entire world. Western Europe is in the range of about 8 to 12%. The US, which is a private sector driven economy, that's more like 18% of GDP. India is at 1.3%. China is around 3.5% or thereabouts. So almost every other country, every other major country is spending much more by way of public expenditure on health. India needs to do much more, not withdraw, but to put in much more money. All of that is going to help the bottom sections of the population. If there's an illness in a below the poverty line family, they can go to the government hospitals and get help. But in addition to that, certain other safety nets, by way of certain kinds of dose, cheaper grains, and so to some extent we do it, but it's not enough, I suppose. Now, one more thing I'll say, it is not right to think that other countries, particularly in Europe, are free of this difficulty. There is a poverty population in those countries as well. Even in the US of A, there are people who are at a very low level of, in relation to the expected living standards, because people have to spend money on basic transportation, on utilities, because those are colder countries and so forth. And there's a sizable section of the population which falls below the minimum. The problem of poverty is a real one in Western Europe and North America also, though the percentages may be lower. And to add to the fact that with artificial intelligence and so forth, there is a fair section of the population going without jobs now, going for the gig economy. They are finding things very difficult. So it's a complex issue, but certainly in the Indian context, much more needs to be done.
I want to add in one more thing. I personally believe, that the super rich should be taxed more, not to give into the hands of the government for politicians to spend, but which is a transfer to the poor. Because lots of people argue for greater equality, but to the poor end, bottom end. It's my belief. This is not right or wrong, because of course you can't prove this. It is just a position. And I'll tell you what, inequality, people very often, those who believe in complete free market, say if you work hard, you make a lot. But most of the inequality in India is at birth. Some people are born with virtually nothing. Some people are born super rich because they inherit. Even in America, there is inheritance tax. They cut off a little bit of this link. I feel there should be an inheritance tax, and there's a transfer so that this inequality at the start of life should be mitigated a little bit. Do you all have any? Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to add that in the developed countries, in fact, you will be surprised that public education is there. In fact, if you look at societies like the UK, in Europe, in the European countries, there's public education which is virtually free and of very good quality. Something that Mosami was talking about. Also health.
Yeah.
That, what Pulin was saying, there's a very substantial spending on public health facilities. So these are things which are provided to the population and which people in India do not get. In fact, we need to spend more. We don't need to spend less. There is, because of our poverty, we need more of that, not less. If you look at a country like China, we think of China as a miracle economy. India and China were equally poor. But China, and China went through communism, a very severe form of communism in the time of Mao Zedong. Later on, Deng Xiaoping took over, the economy opened up, liberalization and so forth, and they developed at a very fast rate. But one of the things which happened in China during the Maoist period was that they took care of basics. Health, education for everyone. So if you look at the parameters on which we look at these things: infant mortality, life expectancy, and what else? Education.
Yeah.
Now, China was, they had, from a very poor country, they had managed to get 99% literacy. We still don't have that. We still do not have 99% literacy. Our literacy levels are what?
73 for something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
And that too, the quality is something which is very, very doubtful. And basic health was there in China during the Maoist period. That is something that they achieved.